Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us for another PI4D COVID Research Spotlight series set of talks. We are excited to relaunch this series and get back together and hearing what people in our community are doing, both in research and what they're doing to deal with COVID pandemic. We're still in this somewhat shutdown mode. We're definitely not over it. And I thought it would be a great idea to invite Tim Newby, who's a professor in Learning Design and Technology program of the Department of Curriculum and Instruction here at Purdue. And he conducts interesting research on issues pertaining to learning and motivation, instructional strategies, and combining that with technology. And been doing great research this year on how, we've had to adapt to this new environment of teaching and learning. So I thought it would be great to have him on. And then also I thought it would be a great idea to hear from Mohit Verma, professor in ag and biological engineering, who specializes in biosensors, microbiome, all kinds of point of care diagnostics. And he's going to talk to us a little bit about his COVID test that he is commercializing. So welcome, everybody. Without further ado, I introduce you to Tim Newby. Tim, we're excited to hear what you've been doing and how teachers are adapting to this new environment and how you've been a part of that. So please take it away.
Well, thank you, Tommy. And it's a great honor to just be able to talk to you and tell you a little bit about what some of the things that we've been doing and working on. Let me just share my screen here with you. And hopefully you'll be able to see there that it'll come up here. And there we go, like that. So did you see that? Hopefully you can see that.
Yes.
Oh, you got it. Okay. Okay. So one of the things that I've talked to my students about, maybe a little bit of background about myself. One of the courses, the main courses that I teach here is to pre-service teachers. So these are teacher wannabes that want to go out and become teachers later on. And it's a large undergraduate class. And we talk about the different technologies they can use and strategies and other things with teaching and motivating their students and some of the things along that line. So here is the title of this is Becoming an Online Educator, even when I didn't sign up for it. And there's some kind of interesting things that go along with that. And I kind of will just talk about. For the past maybe 5 years or so, I will, in my lectures, at one point in my lecture, I will talk to these students and I'll have maybe between, I don't know, around 100 students in the lecture. And I'll just talk to them and just say, how many of you do want to become an online teacher? And I would ask them. Now, this is before 2020, but it was, I would ask them every semester. And I tried everything to convince them that this was a good idea. And out of many, many semesters, I had one student that raised their hand to that question. Most of them, no, their idea of a teacher would be in the classroom and working with the students and not in the online setting. So my pre-service teachers were not very much in favor of becoming an online teacher. And then all of a sudden, March 20 of 2020, all of those students that had gone on and graduated and were out there and said they'd never become an online teacher became that, and whether they wanted to or not. And so that all of a sudden happened. So now I have a different approach with my students. It's, you've got to learn this. This is part of the deal. And we've actually become, in the College of Education, we now have our students, as they go through, they actually get a certification as a blended and online teacher. That's just the kind of the rules now that they go through, and they have to have that certification as they go through. Anyway, so back in March of 2020, life became disrupted for teachers specifically. And then the interesting thing about it is that it just didn't go away. It's continuing to be disrupted in many different ways. So the first thing I'd like to look at, and we started thinking about is, this pandemic has really caused all different kinds of disruptions in the norm. So is there a need really for kids to be in school, and why? And you can go through this and kind of look at it and say, first of all, just the progression of learning. They need to be there so they can experience it and go through it and have that. This idea of structure and normalcy and that very much is necessary for learning to be continued and to be maximized in the way that it needs to be. So there's something about being able to go into a classroom, be there and do it, and our students learn in a very regimented way that way, and it helps in many ways. And then just this health and safety and protection of being at school and having someone there to watch after them and to help them, and from a healthy standpoint and other things. So we have that type of problem that is. So there's that need for kids to be there, and we're learning all about that. And then we start looking at this. We've got this disruption. What's the disruption from the teacher's point of view? When you look at that, you see, you've got this disruption in normal presentation. I cannot present the way that I have been trained to present, and that's what they were facing. Disruption in a normal communication. I can't even talk to my students the way that I used to. I can't reach out to them, and not just them, but their guardians and I can't even talk to my other teachers and the administrators the way that I used to when I'm not there at the school and that. So that all of this type of disruption happens. And then the idea of preparing. What am I preparing and how I'm doing it? And then you get this idea they're being asked to go above and beyond. How many times did we hear that they're asked, and from teachers when you start to talk to them, they're asked to be doing things that they were never trained to do. In a way, it was different. And it was very, very difficult on all of that. And of course, then they've got their own personal family health issues, their own childcare, their own other things that they have to learn about. So you've got all of this disruption to their lives too. So not only is the student having challenges, but you've got the teachers. And I'm teaching to the choir right now and preaching to the choir, if you will, because you've all experienced this. You're all parents, you know about teachers, you've seen it online and other things of what's going on there. So, so there's that. So you have the pandemic. It's really, this has been kind of interesting because here from a learning perspective, we have a learning experience that this whole audience, all the teachers, all the students have had at the same time. So they can all relate to it. So now we can go back and say, what did we learn from all of this? And everybody has that common experience background and different ways in which they've approached to come up with it. And so that's what we started to study and to try to understand and see from that common experience background. About this time, the summer of 2020, the Indiana Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund became available. This was a funding from the national government that sent down to the governors. And specifically, they were saying, what can we do to help teachers? And they gave it to the governors to understand. And so what happened there is they opened up these funds and applications for them and say, what kind of tools are going to be needed? How can we support the schools in certain ways? And schools could apply for these funds, as well as universities and other private entities to help out, and the focus being on what can we do to help students and teachers to learn better within the pandemic type of situation. So some of the schools applied for some of these funds just because they needed to have the equipment. They needed to get, their students didn't have computers or didn't have tablets or didn't have ways in which to access the internet. And so they applied for funds to be able to do that. Where universities, they said, help us to teach the teachers to be able to handle this equipment when they get it and that type of stuff. And so all the different training that needed to happen. And so that's where our place went into it. And so Purdue applied for some of those and we received some funds to do that. And that's what I would like to tell you about how we've spent those funds from our perspective right now and some of the things that we've been working on. So these are the kind of questions that we started to ask. If a teacher must teach during a pandemic, what resources do they need? And then are there things being learned now that can be used post-pandemic? I was like the same as everybody else, thinking by the time I used these funds, we were able to use them. The grant goes until September of 2022. Now I'm in the summer of 2020 thinking, okay, well, I see the need for us to learn about online instruction because teachers in the future will not necessarily need it from pandemics, but they will need it for snow days and for other things that they might be able to use the online instruction for. But obviously by the end of the summer or whatever, everything's going to change because the pandemic will go away. And here we are, you know, all these months later, the end of this grant comes at the end of this summer, and it's still very relevant to pandemic and how we handle pandemics in a way that are there. So are there things now that can be learned and used post-pandemic, but also during the pandemic? So we started to come up with a number of different things. And one of those is, I don't know if you've ever worked with teachers before. I mean, these in-service teachers, they're a very opinionated lot. And they have certain things that they like and certain things they don't like. And I'll tell you, some of those things, that authentic voice that it says teachers trust other teachers, they do. Do they trust university professors? Not on your life. They don't want to be dictated to. They don't even hardly trust their administrators unless they were really good teachers before they became administrators. They trust each other, and they you know, they swap stories, and they really help each other. But they want to make sure that it's coming from their best interests and not being told from the ivory tower how things should go. So we had to watch that very closely, and in the idea of what we were going to develop had to be something that they saw immediately as having value because it came from their voice in some way. It has to be easy to access. They are totally overburdened. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. Totally overburdened, but at the same time, it has to be of value, and they have to see that value very, very quickly. And it has to be free. So because they're already using all their extra money to make sure that their kids have socks to wear, let alone, you know, to all the rest of the things that they have. And so they can't be spending a whole bunch of money on this. So that value has to be there. They have to see that it has to be quick to understand it. And we have to totally understand their background and where they're coming from, what they've learned from. So those are things to keep in mind as we start to develop this helpful, how we develop anything to help them in the way that they should be helped. So how can we use teacher experience? Now we have this whole group of individuals, all these teachers who have had this experience of going online when they don't know what it means to go online. They've had these experiences. How can we use those experiences to help coach us and how we can best deliver that? So we've got this, you hire, the first thing we thought is we have to hire teachers and bring them in. And so that's what we did. We went out and we hired 2 teachers that were currently and we just grabbed them up, and individuals that could help us in the very best way. And they've turned out to be actually a huge blessing to this grant. We wanted to survey current teachers that are out there and what they're going through as best as we possibly across the state of Indiana, not just teachers that were in large school districts, but we wanted rural school districts, large school districts. And so we did a very good sampling of the teachers across the state. And then we wanted to work with those teachers and say, come in and take a look at what we're doing. Do you give your blessing to it? Do you think that this is of value? How can you, and tell us how we can change and do it so that it is of value to you. So we designed this around making sure that we were really, really listening to the potential users of this information, and tried as hard as to do that. And then we wanted to make sure that those teachers understood that everything that we were going to develop was going to be evaluated by them before we turned it loose, and that we were going to bring in the individuals, teachers, to take a look at it and see what was there. And that's how we've kind of designed this whole thing, really with the learner, with the user in mind as we've gone through it. So we sent out surveys. We got over 800 surveys back from the teachers. We got all their background information. We really got their perceptions on online learning effectiveness, student engagement, online teaching confidence, and some of those things. And then we asked them about their significant, what kind of challenges did you run into? That was within these surveys. And I'll tell you, when you ask them certain questions, we spent hundreds of hours going through seeing, because they wrote to us and said, these are the kind of things that we were facing out there. Some of them were just tearjerkers about, oh my gosh, I didn't have any idea that a teacher could face something like this with some of their students, and some of the things that their students were going through in these kind of experiences, and the frustrations that they had and stuff. So we went through and got all of the different, we tried to glean out all the different topics, especially the things they said, I wish I knew about this, Or after struggling with it, this is what I found out actually works. And they started telling us about those kind of things. These strategies work. This in working with this. I wish that I would have had this capability. If anybody could teach us about this capability, it would have taken off so much effort from my part trying to get to my students and help us. So we went through and did that. And then what we did is we took those surveys, those things, right up here, the surveys. Then we reviewed and determined, we went through all of them as best we could and came up with all of these different categories, and from the categories, the different topics that they were talking about. And we came up with this list of key topics that came from the surveys and from working with our teachers. And then we brought a group of teachers together, and we, over a series of, I can't remember, 6 or 8 weeks, we met with them twice a week for 2 hours. And this was all done online, and they went through all of these topics and told us why certain ones were important, why some were less important, that. And we came up with these topics here, as you can see. These are the categories: learning environments, learner engagement. These actually go very closely with, and I know this would be hard to see, but I'll show you one up close here in a second. These categories that they have, which kind of tells you, or these match up really well with the state's standards on blended and online learning. And that helped us give us some ideas. And then we broke those down into these common topics that they identified. So there's things like student motivation in online environments. How do I keep my students motivated when I can't be there with them? And then online, how do I, student stakeholder and communication. I don't know how to communicate with my students in the best, most effective way. How is that done? And how can you help me to do it in a very efficient way? I used to be able to just stand up in front of the class and tell them. And if I needed them to take something home, I gave them a handout and said, I pinned it to their coat and said, take this home to your parents. And they would do it, that kind of thing. How do I do that in online? So we have all of those kind of topics that are there. And so we had this list and said, so what do we do with it? How do we make it helpful for the teacher? What should we, what will it look like? How will they access it if we help them with those things? And will they actually use it at the end? And then specifically we said, for you to use it, what should it look like? And so we came up with, in talking with the teacher, they said, well, it needs to be something online that we can get free and that we can get fast. And it needs to have some kind of an overview. So within a few sentences, I want to be able to judge whether this topic has enough value that I will invest any time in it. It says, so please give us in just a couple sentences what this thing is about and why it's important to me. And then show me in a video. 3 to 5 minutes. I don't need 30 minutes. I don't have 30 minutes to spend on it, but 3 to 5 minutes, and give it to me in a way that I can understand and I can trust. And then come up with your solutions that are listed there, that if I've determined that it's of value to me, I can and see this is a value, that I will go in and spend some time with it. I can get the information that is there. And please give me some teachers that actually have used it and promise me that it's going to work, and they can show me from their perspective that it works. And any other resources that you can throw in there to make it. So that's what we've come up with, the online and blended teaching hub, if you will. That's what we're calling it right now. And from there, let me just kind of go into it. Now, this is just a mock-up site that we have. So we're still just in the middle of developing all of this. I have 12 graduate students that work with me. In learning design and technology, we teach our graduate students to be instructional designers. And so that's what they do, is design instructional materials and put those things together. So this has been a really great little environment. We can give them a topic to work on, and they develop this instructional material and stuff. And it's been really fun to see their growth that they've had. You can see that we've put up the standards. So if they click on it, you can see the different standards that are there, and they can, take a look at what those standards are, and that's fine. And teachers deal with standards all of the time. So it helps to make sense to them of how we tie that to it. But basically they can go in and they can take a look at this resource library. And if they click on any of the specific standard areas, it will come up with, this is the topics, that great big long list that I showed you that we've broken down. And then each of these will have a link to it that basically, you can go out and click to it. It'll give you the information that you need. So in this case, the student stakeholder is brought up. So if you want to know about how I communicate best with my students in an online environment, I can go there and click on that, and it comes up the student and stakeholder. And here is that little bit of that paragraph that we allowed them to try to convince you that, hey, this is what this is about. Is this of value to you? They can read that. Here is the video. So when you turn on the video, and of course it has to be branded in some way, but you get, let me get rid of that. You'll notice that this is narrated by Karen Smith. Karen Smith is a Title I teacher, a third grade teacher in Indianapolis. And she's going to tell the other teachers why student stakeholder communication is important. And she'll spend about 5 minutes doing that, going through and saying, this is why it's important. And these are the key things that you need to know about this and do it. But it's coming from a teacher to the other teachers out there. And here's some questions that you can consider. And so for each one of these 40 topics or whatever, we have this kind of thing. We've added some things here too, also that help teachers. We call it, this is the opening page they'll come into, but we've got printables. So if you want a topic summary, we can click on the topic summary and it's a 1-page, it's coming slowly, I think. There it is. It gives you a 1-page printout. They can print that out if they want it and hold it, and they can take a look at it if they want more information about that. Oops, went to the wrong one here. There we go. What I really like about this is that our students and our group have created all kinds of infographics for the teacher. Infographics are just a graphical way of showing you what the key elements are here. If you want to know about 6 ways to communicate effectively in blended online environments, you can click on that and it will come up with basically an electronic poster that says, here it is. You can print this out, put it on your wall. You can send it to your students. You can just look at it and it gives you the information. So student and stakeholder communication, 6 ways to do it. One of the things is to use clear and plain words for some teachers, and how to go about that. Decrease complexity, use tables and charts, but it's in a nice format that they can see and they can understand that fairly quickly on that. Let's see if I can go back there to that. Another one, 5 steps to stay connected with parents and guardians, because that was one of the key things that they had. So all of these type of things. And then the next one on this area is web resources. Here are your teacher information. These are teachers that have done things in this area that other teachers would want to know how they've done it. And so we give them a little bit of information about this. And this video, Barbara, a teacher, provides a few tips and recommendations on how to communicate with parents. And so they can quickly find that out. They can go to that website and find out from this teacher exactly how to do those kind of things. And we've got all of those listed down here. So if an individual teacher is having trouble communicating with their teacher, she can go to this one area, find out real quickly about the information, and then come here and find out additional things that they can do and learn from it. And basically, this is a hub that's going to be free free to any teacher, basically in the world, that is going to be able to access it and to use it. Now, not only do we do that for those topics, but also many of our teachers want to know about specific technologies. What kind of things, like LMSs? How do I use Google Classroom effectively? How do I develop that? How do I develop a teacher website in the best possible way? How do I use various different things? Well, the next step in what we have just started to work into is adding teacher technologies. And so we have things such as this. This is one of our teachers that we've hired and developed this. But you'll see a similar, it'll be developed in the Purdue way, just a very similar way to it. But Padlet is one of the things that teachers use. It's a technology that teachers use very effectively. The grade levels that generally use it. And then you break it down to what is it? And here's the introduction and introductory video. If you're going to teach with it, here are some things that you need to know. We can use Padlet to do all of these kind of things and quickly understand. And a teacher can go in here and find out, this is a tool that I really need, or it is not a tool that I don't need. And we have 40 of these tools that we are currently developing in this way. Implementation process. I questioned her and said, why do we need, this part? Can't we just go to resources and examples? And one of the problems that we always run into, and that I never have appreciated as much until I've been lectured to a number of times by these various teachers, is that it's not just easy within the classroom to be able to implement technologies. You have to go through quite a few steps to make sure that your technology is going to be accepted by the IT guys there, and on and on and on, to be able to be used with students. It has to be vetted in certain ways. And that's what this implementation process is. In many cases, teachers have decided what they need, but just can't get to it because the IT or whatever will not have it.
Tim, I wanted to ask a question, and I hope it's okay that we do ask some questions. We have
yes,
only
and
a
in
few
fact,
minutes.
that's the last one, I believe.
Good. I wanted to ask you, were there differences between grades and the teachers that were dealing with education at a different grade level? Or was that mainly a continuum of same issues repeated over and over again in the grades?
I think probably the bigger division was between those that had some technology background and those that didn't. You have a lot of teachers that didn't know how to even get to first base with some of the things, and consequently they struggled greatly because they couldn't. Those individuals that had come out and had a pretty solid background on how to use various communication tools, were familiar already with Zoom, were familiar with certain things. They jumped into it and were able to accomplish things at a greater speed than some of the others. And so they were leaned on heavily by other individuals. You saw in many cases where teachers would almost back off from the technology. They would send out printed materials in certain ways, bus drivers that would come around, pick up packets from school districts and take them back out to the students because that's what they were familiar with and how they did it. So they came back that way. There were certain things that happened that our teachers said were the most effective things possible, and it kept coming up. And that was what, from March until the end of the school year, it was chaos. There was a lot of disruption. But over the summer, some of the teachers had school districts that actually had training sessions and they had practice days, and they did other practice things. And those practice days really helped those. And they got the individuals together that had knowledge. So if you had a third grade teacher that had knowledge of how to do some of those things, they grouped together with other teachers and helped them. And I think that's where the biggest advantage was versus that. I didn't, yeah. Some of the other things that were there, the difficulties, the challenges, was that some students just dropped off the teachers. They were totally frustrated because they had students that just never saw a need to make a connection at all, even though the connections were possible. They just stopped going.
And one last question, are these tools available to us, even at the university, for our own? Yeah.
That's our goal. I've put up this slide which says, similar to Purdue's OWL, the online writing lab, anybody in the world can use that. That's our idea of we're going to be able to do this, so that at the university level, at the whatever, you will be able to access it. It's going to be open to it. Everybody keeps coming to me and say, well, how are you going to keep it up to date? Is it just going to die after, September or the end of the funding? What happens? What we've done is we've incorporated this within our pre-service training. All of our pre-service teachers have to know this system very, very well and all of the information. And so we will now, part of our undergraduate training, we'll keep this up to date so that they're being trained properly, and that this will be continually be available, but we can keep things running the way that it should. And that's how we'll keep it funded as we go through it. We'll have TAs that will continually work at it. That's at least the idea behind it.
We would appreciate it if you put the link on the chat box before you leave. And we thank you so much for your presentation and your time today.
Yes.
And for doing this great service, this great work. All of us are teachers in one way or another. And I really appreciate your time today. And thanks for sharing with us.
Yes, and Tommy, I'll send you when the actual link comes up. I think that's going to be up in the next few weeks.
Okay.
This one that I showed you today is just our dummy version, so it's not fleshed out completely. It's just something for demonstration.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
That'll be great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate this. I'll stop
Yes.
sharing now.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
And I guess we'll move now to Mohit Verma. Mohit, thank you also for taking time to join us today. We're excited to hear where you are with your test, your COVID test, rapid COVID test, saliva-based, if I'm not mistaken, and PCR-based. So really exciting work, Mohit Verma from Ag and Biological Engineering. Please take it away.
Hello, everyone. It's nice to be here. Thanks, Tommy, for inviting me, and thanks for that introduction. As mentioned, I will talk about the saliva-based COVID-19 test that we've been developing. So just a little bit of background. I've been at Purdue since 2018, and when I got here, I started working on developing biosensors for animal health with the goal of being able to do these tests in the farm. So we started with bovine respiratory disease, which is a big problem in beef cattle and dairy cattle. And the idea was, can you test the cattle on the farm and then decide what treatment might be appropriate? So we were successful in internal support as well as support externally to develop that platform. While we were developing it, the pandemic broke out, and we were kind of in the right place, had the right people in connections to start working on taking that platform and applying it to COVID-19. So we worked with some external partners to try to build this kit that could detect SARS-CoV-2, the virus responsible for COVID-19, in saliva samples. So overall, what we were trying to solve is diagnostics have mostly been limited to the lab, whether that is for animal health, human health, and what that causes is it still requires days to get a response in most cases. This problem has been tackled by several other people, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic, and you can see a whole bunch of devices that are now available to tackle this issue. For example, in the first row, you see some tests that use nucleic acid-based testing. In the second row, you see tests that are using antigen-based testing, and in the third row, you see antibody-based tests. Most of them have received FDA emergency use authorization, so they are available commercially. But a challenge that remains is just the supply of these tests. The demand keeps fluctuating, especially every time you have a new variant, the demand surges, and you can get devices that end up being out of stock. I've just shown one example here from earlier this month. This is a new device again, but it seems to be out of stock. So there's still room for more devices, more scalable devices, and that's one of the things that we were tackling. So what we've been doing is using an isothermal molecular method. So you can detect nucleic acids. So in this case, RNA, you can do it for DNA as well. And then incorporating that onto paper-based devices so that you can actually scale up the production of these tests to detect respiratory diseases, in this case, COVID-19, at the point of care. Point of care could be in the pharmacy, in doctor's office, or even at home, which is really our eventual target. So to build this, the workflow would look something like this. You collect a sample. In the case of humans, it's saliva. In the case of animals, we've been using nasal swabs. You transfer the sample onto the paper-based device, which is in the middle, shown in gray. The paper-based device goes into a heater, which is shown in blue over here. The heater provides the heat that's necessary to conduct the assay. Then you take it out, and then you look at the color. So we have, for example, two zones. The test zone will tell you whether the test is negative if it remains red, or positive if it changes to yellow. So that's just an overview of how it would work. And to get this color change, we are using, as I mentioned, an isothermal method. It's called loop-mediated isothermal amplification, or LAMP for short. And the way it works is you have a target sequence of nucleic acid, which is shown in black over here. And you have specific short sequences we call them primers, that will make the assay specific to the target sequence, which are shown in these color blocks. So once you find the target sequence, the primers will amplify your target and create these dumbbell-like structures. And that's what that's where the loop term comes from. These structures, as they're amplifying, it's a polymerization reaction. So you're adding a nucleic acid to increase the length of the strand to create more copies. And every time you add a nucleotide, you are producing a proton. the proton causes a change in pH, and this pH change can be detected as a color change. And that's what we're doing here. So as an example, you can see with the formulation that we have, what we get is if you have a high pH, you see a color of red or purple. And then as you get more polymerization, more reaction happening, the pH will drop to around 6.2, 6.4, and you can see that color change to about yellow or orange. And this can be seen by the naked eye. And we just created thresholds of what should be called positive or negative so that we can determine what the result is. To be able to do this on paper, we had to do some troubleshooting because there are assays that were already available in liquid that could show a color change. But if you want to scale it up to, let's say, millions of devices per week, we want to bring it on paper because you can fabricate them on a roll-to-roll basis. You can it makes it simpler to use as well. So if we just took the reagents that were available commercially, so that would be the control setup over here, we put them on paper, then within 10 minutes, so if you see on the x-axis, the left ones are 0 minutes, the right is 10 minutes, the color starts to change to yellow. And we think it's because the paper is being acidified, and that's causing the color change. So we wanted to figure out which of the components is causing this acidification. So what we did was we eliminated one component at a time. So on the left label axis, you see which component was eliminated. And what we saw is in most of them, it still changes to yellow, except if you have the ammonium ions that are not present. So that means that the ammonium ions are really the ones that are causing this color change to yellow, which is a problem because if you have yellow to start off, you won't really get a color change when you get a reaction. So that's a problem. So what we did was look for alternatives to this ammonium. We replaced it out so that we can maintain this red color to start with. And then we built our test from there. So for COVID-19, the workflow looks as follows. We start with a commercially available saliva collection device. So we screened a few different ones to determine which one gives us most consistent results and is compatible with the assay that we've developed. We settled on this one called PureCell. And this work is published, by the way, by the reference given below. So you collect the saliva, you dilute it down in water. We do the dilution because saliva actually has a very strong buffering capacity. Because we're using pH as a reporter, if it is completely buffered, then the pH won't change. So once you dilute it down, the buffering capacity is reduced. You can see change in pH, change in color. You transfer this diluted saliva onto your device. In this case, I'm showing two zones, control as well as the test zone, which is for the virus. Incubate it, and then you read the results after 60 minutes in this case. If it's positive, it should change to yellow. If it's negative, it should remain red. So to characterize our devices, we first characterize the paper pads for limiter detection. So you see in panel B over here, copies per microliter. So this is copies per microliter of saliva. The limit of detection would be wherever you see all three replicates changing color. So at the bottom is the negative, which looks pink, dark pink, purple. And what you want to see is when you see three replicates changing color. And you can see that from 200 onwards, you can see the three replicates changing color. So our limit of detection is 200 copies per microliter. And that's consistent with at least initially how FDA was defining these initial limiters of detection for EU emergency use authorization purposes. So now we take these paper pads and build a device that has two pads. One is a control. It doesn't have any primers, so it's used to see in case the saliva is too acidic or something like that, then we'll know what's going on. And the other one is a test zone, which has all the primers and can be used for testing. We assemble them together with polystyrene spacers, which are shown in white, just to avoid cross-contamination between these two zones. A double-sided adhesive and a backing. The Melanix backing is clear so that you can see through and see the color change very clearly. And then the adhesive keeps everything together. So it's a very simple setup. But the reason it is this way is so that, again, it can be scaled up, fabricated using roll-to-roll techniques. It's the setup that's used. It's very similar to the setup that's used right now in urine strips, which have several zones. And those are fabricated at billions per year. So it can be made at a really large scale, potentially. And then as an example, in panel D, what you see, the reaction, if it's negative, it should look as follows, kind of remain purple or red. If it's positive, the control should still remain purple or red, and then the reaction zone should be changing to yellow. And this setup is, the cost of materials is in the order of $10 per test. which makes it feasible as well in terms of cost effectiveness. So now we take these test results and we want to assess how well people can distinguish with the naked eye in terms of positive and negative. So what we do is we set a color scale. On the right is the negative. So anything that's below this threshold will be considered negative. Anything that's above the threshold would be considered positive. And so we then give a bunch of these results to people to look at and see whether they can classify it correctly or not. With the naked eye, you see decent values, I would say. Sensitivity is 76%, specificity is high, 100%, accuracy around 90%, 91%. But the challenge was we got a very high invalid rate, which means that we define invalid as if the control zone was showing color change, then that's an invalid test. And in some of our results, like these edges, for example, might be changing, and people would consider that invalid, which was a challenge, right? Because then you're getting rid of 25% of the results, even though the tests were actually valid. So what we did was instead just did image analysis. So we just looked at the number of pixels in a square that were actually changing color above this threshold, and then classified based on those results, and we got the following. So if you look at the image analysis, we can see a clear distinction between the negative controls and the positive test zones. So in the left and right. And this approach makes the results much better in terms of how accurately it can detect the test. So in panel B, if you've seen a ROC curve or a receiver operator characteristic curve, it looks as follows. The diagonal line is a coin flip. So the further away your test is from the diagonal line, the better it is. So the blue line is quite far away. You ideally would be like up to the square one, around this 1 point. It's very close to it. So it's a good test. And from that, you can get the sensitivity and specificity values, which are much higher, and the accuracy around 98%. So that tells us that using image analysis really improves the analytical performance of this test. And that can be a way to get better results. So with that, what we did was so the paper-based devices that I showed you need to go into a cartridge that people can handle. And then we need a heater to heat up everything. So we worked with, as I mentioned, industrial partners, collaborators to do that. Codex Design worked on the cartridge and the heater setup that you see on the left. So the cartridge is with the green handle and the clear kind of thing. Inside here, you see the white zone. That is our paper-based devices, and I have it here, which you can see too if you're looking at my video. That's what it looks like. It's pretty easy to handle. And then the heater is about the size of a smartphone as well, just a little bit thicker, that can conduct the assay. So after conducting it, you take it out and look at it. On the right, what you see is what the kit would look like. So we work with Protoscience to do the packaging. The very right is just the saliva collection device. In the middle is our cartridge with the paper strip inside and everything. And on the outside is a color chart. So that shows you when you take the test, if you want to look at whether it's negative or positive, that's the color chart that you would compare it to. So again, that looks something like this. You can kind of see it with the virtual background. And then there's a disposable pipette just for the dilution purposes. So this is what the kit would look like if we provide it to someone and they can do the test themselves. Where we are right now, our part was really the development of the test and then handing it over to industrial partners to scale it up, do some clinical work and such. So we've licensed the IP to our industrial partners, and we're waiting for clinical testing. So when we went through the FDA EUA emergency use authorization process, one of the things that came up was clinical samples and clinical validation, which we couldn't do because at least at the time, we didn't have a good setup to run clinical samples. So that's where we are. We've handed it off and we're in the process of saying, okay, where can we do proper clinical trials, see what is the diagnostic sensitivity and specificity value. So the ones that I presented are analytical because we're spiking in the samples ourselves. We know what concentrations there are, but at the clinical scale, how well does it work? That's really what needs to be evaluated to move it further. So that's where we are. But the technology itself, because it detects nucleic acid, it is a platform technology, has multiple applications. So what we're doing now in my lab is taking those lessons and applying it to other human respiratory diseases. So for example, influenza is one we're targeting. But then also a big focus is on animal health. So we're looking at bovine respiratory disease, continuing working on bacteria, viruses, and antibiotic resistance genes. We're also starting a project very soon on African swine fever, which is a pandemic, but in pigs, and it has very high lethality. We look at food safety from fresh produce contamination, markers for fecal contaminations, as well as pathogenic bacteria, and also starting to look at plant diseases. There's a lot of different applications. And we can do this out in the field. So for example, for the bovine respiratory disease project, we've demonstrated, as you see in the images on the right, that we can go out in the feedlot, collect a sample from cattle in panel B, mix it with water, transfer it in C and D to our reagents. The reagents were prepared in the lab, but then everything else is being done in the field. Put it in a water bath, as you see in E, and the water bath is simply a sous vide cooker. So if you've done that before, it's something that's available consumer grade, and it reaches the right temperature that we need. So we put our assays there, and you can see through the water bath, which is great. So you can see how the color is changing, and you can get the result right there on the feedlot within an hour. So we demonstrated that this works fairly well. We're now in the process of combining these assays with paper-based devices to make it even simpler. With that, I'd like to thank the people that have worked in my lab, current and past. The ones that have worked on the projects are highlighted in bold, as well as the collaborators, both within Purdue and outside. And funding sources, both external industry, foundation, as well as federal, and internal support from Purdue. I would like to advertise if there are people listening and find this interesting and you have the right background, we are hiring postdocs to work on more of the animal health. If you have the right background, come talk to me. I'll be happy to chat, as well as upcoming microbiome symposium. So you see some of the work that we do is related to respiratory microbiome, more on the sensing side of things. We're expanding on that. If you want to hear more about how microbiome works and such, there's a symposium coming up in May, and the dates are listed there. With that, thank you everyone for listening. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mohit. Fantastic and great progress. So happy to hear about that progress. I asked Robin to reach out to you so that maybe we can have a side meeting and see how maybe we can help you with the clinical piece for the test and moving forward. I've been trying to think and also been making some progress within the CTSI that I think could be helpful. Any questions from the group? Mohit, one thing that I was thinking is that if image analysis is the way to go for more accurate detection, do you need somebody to maybe help you make an app that can read the results and interpret so that the human eyes don't need to be counted on?
Yeah, so that's what we realized, even from a user experience point of view. We learned that it would be more useful to have a built-in imager in addition to the heater, and then just automatically do that analysis in there. So we are working on that, but if you have the people that are working on it and could help us accelerate that process, that would definitely help to integrate it with our heating system.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I have one question. You said you're doing a clinical study, but one question I have is this. When new variant comes along, Abbott and other companies produce their detection system right away. When do they do clinical study, and how do they introduce the product so fast?
Yeah, so it's actually not that difficult for people who have the clinical samples, because it's like initially FDA only required 30 positive and 30 negative samples. Those requirements have gone up a little bit as process have gone forward. But if they already have access to hospitals and samples, it's actually pretty quick to do. Like within a month, you can do it if you have the right setup. We just didn't have the right setup. That's why we never got it in time. In terms of variants, though, one simple way of testing it, just based on sequences, we can test how well it should work. And so far, the sequence that we've targeted has been conserved enough that we can still get more than 95% of the variants, at least from genetic testing, from genetic sequencing. Clinically, we still don't know how well it actually works, but that's
I think you presented great data. It's showing that about 25% time the reading may be a problem.
Yep.
But you're saying this because you're honest, but I don't know whether companies actually say this thing. Because who knows their product actually, how accurate are they really? I mean, we know that fast testing has been wrong many times. So that has been the problem with White House in many places. So really, how accurate are these products on the market right now?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think that's been source of critique for how FDA handled it overall, because they tried to do very quickly lots of tests that got approved, right? Whereas now in retrospect, it's like, oh, maybe we should have spent more resources, but on fewer ones better performing.
Yeah,
yeah, that's hard to, obviously, it would have to be like independently evaluated or something. So do a side-by-side comparison to see how well it really works. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think the FDA, because a lot of these PCR tests are, oh, I changed the primers and now we're ready to go with the new PCR test. They're comfortable with that as an established technology. So it's fairly easy to, pivot and redo the kits for that. The other is the layers of scrutiny and regulatory for if the test is going to be done and performed by a trained medical person or a laboratory technician. Let's say, the test is sent typically to a lab like LabCorp or LabQuest, and there's a technician there that is running the test. And so that is one layer of scrutiny that the FDA has. But what Mohit is trying to go after here is for everybody to have in their home and be able to use this in the home. And so that takes even further scrutiny, because the clinical trial here is not just can you detect a positive from a negative sample accurately, but can you give this to a human being who will read the instructions and know how to perform the test and interpret the test. And so there is a lot of scrutiny in that regard, because these are not trained individuals like they would be in a lab course. So there's two separate regulatory approvals that would need to take place. First is for the LabQuest type of scenario, and then the other one would be an at-home type of test.
I think we should put Mohit in charge of the National COVID Sensing Institute.
Please, let's do it. And maybe he can be president too. I love it. Well, thank you so much. I don't know if there are any other questions, but I think that, definitely the path has probably been accelerated because of your commercial partners, but there is still some work to be done, and perhaps there's ways that we can still help here in adding value. Mohit.
Yeah, just to calibrate, Tommy, like there's a recent review that came out in terms of when companies were established versus when they were able to get EUA, and how much money was given to them from the government. And you can see that, what we're competing against is really companies that are established at least 10 years ago. They were already going and stuff, right? And we were trying to do this in 1 or 2 years, and that's where I was like, oh, this is pretty challenging. And they've gotten several millions of dollars too. So,
right,
yeah.
No, I agree.
But yeah, it's a challenge. It's been a learning experience. It's definitely accelerated compared to where we were. So that's definitely been good.
Good. And there are a few, are there other LAMP-based diagnostics that the FDA has approved? So there is some precedent?
Yep, there is one RT LAMP at home that has been approved. And I think that was one of the ones that was on my list in the top figure.
Right.
So there's at least one, yeah. And they have automated analysis, and they kind of just produce the result, yeah.
And now, Mohit, is there the other thing to think about is there an international market to be assisting, right? Yep. Even before the whole FDA piece comes along, there's such a pent-up demand for these diagnostics. And as you pointed out in your presentation, there is low supply. And so is there an opportunity there even to get more clinical data?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I didn't mention this because it's not official or disclosed yet, but that's kind of the direction that we're working on with our industrial partners.
Great.
So yeah.
Awesome. Excellent. Excellent. Anybody else have questions? This is great. I really want to thank you, Mohit. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, everybody, for joining us again for another one of these COVID Research Spotlight. You know, we're going to be doing these recurringly this semester. So if you want to participate, if you want to volunteer to tell us a little bit about your research, please contact me or contact Robin Benson, who is also in the meeting, and we'll be glad to spotlight you at our next. I don't have all of the cards yet tied up for the next meetings. Otherwise, I would tell you what, who, and when and what, but please look out for my email and we'll let you know that way. Thank you again. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks,
Good.
Tommy.
Thanks, Tommy.
Thanks. Bye-bye.